Good afternoon. Welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting. Today's date is February 6, 2012. Can we please have roll call?
Commissioners Ajamian?
Present.
Armenian?
Present.
Dentler?
Present.
Yao?
Present.
President Chang?
Present.
Item 2, approval of the December 5th, 2011 meeting minutes.
Okay. Do we have any corrections to the minutes?
Well, I don't because I wasn't here last time, so I'm going to abstain from...
Anybody else? No? Okay. No corrections. The minutes stand approved.
I believe we have a public speaker.
Item 2. Oh, okay. Sorry. We have one speaker. Mr. Milano, please.
Commissioner, President Chan, members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission and staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I've noticed recently, I think for the past year or so, that the comments made by public speakers before this commission are no longer being recorded on the minutes. It is my belief that any organization that is aimed at increasing the level of transparency and encouraging participation, that would invite and try to bring in as many of the stakeholders as possible before you. I can show you the minutes from, let's say, October of 2007, when I came before the commission, and I think, Mr. Yao, I think it was probably your first year, that the comments that I presented to you and the issues that were of concern were actually put down in the minutes. That practice, I think, was, in my estimation, done by a mandate of the previous city manager, because it's happening at other commissions where I make presentations as well. In the past, many individuals who have come before you to address a concern or an issue having to do with their neighborhood, having to do with costs, having to do with recycled water, I think they merit recording on the minutes because it makes it easier for the public to do a search on text rather than have to go through the archives and looking at the video recording. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do. And it is my opinion that, it doesn't need to be extensive. A couple of lines that identifies the issues, whether we are for or against something, or we try to bring your attention to something of importance that the Commission may not have taken up during that particular month's agenda. It is my recommendation that perhaps as part of your new business that you bring back the practice that we used to have years ago of recording the comments and the concerns that the public has when they come before you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam President and members of the Commission, it's the practice of this Commission, at least of recent times, I believe, to follow the practice of City Council as far as what gets recorded in the minutes. It's certainly within your prerogative to include more information, but as noted by the Speaker, it is included in the video archive for record-keeping purposes.
So the Speaker's comments are not recorded in the Council meeting minutes either?
Correct. Presently, just the name of the speaker is recorded in the written minutes.
Maybe we should at least do that. That would be what I recommend.
Well, the actual names of the participants are recorded, yeah.
Okay.
It's just what I think Mr. Milano is stating. He's asking a representation of what was actually said.
I have a question for the attorney. Is this practice of City Council, is that a matter of a written rule or is it just a tradition? Or
Commissioner Dentler, I could investigate that for you. I'm not certain whether there's a written procedure governing that. I would suggest that we take this up under new business since the present item is approval of the minutes.
That sounds good.
Can you also follow up and see if there was a change made, even if it's not written, approximately when that was done, and if there was a reason for it?
Certainly, we can look into that.
Thank you.
instead of taking it up under new business today, then can we just agendize it for a future meeting?
Absolutely. We can agendize it for a future meeting. It seems that there are at least 2 commissioners that are interested in having this brought back, so we'll plan on agendizing it for the future.
Thanks.
Okay, so going back to the December minutes.
I move approval.
Second.
Okay. Minutes are approved. Okay, all right. Next item, please.
Item 3, introduction of new city manager Scott Ochoa.
Madam President, members of the Commission, I'm Steve Lenz, the Chief Assistant General Manager of Glendale Water Power. And this afternoon, we have Glendale's new city manager with us, Scott Ochoa. I'd like to just take a brief moment for an introduction and then give Scott a chance to say a few words. Scott was with Monrovia from 1993 until just this January. He started as an intern and was appointed as city manager in 2004. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Government that he received in 1993, and then my favorite highlight in his bio is that he's got a master's from USC with an emphasis in public sector entrepreneurship. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Ochoa.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to come and speak with you. It is exciting to be here in Glendale after now this will be my fifth week, I think, or fourth and a half week. But this place moves awfully fast, and there's a lot to be done, and certainly the business of GWP as it relates to the overall organization is critically important to me. This notion of public sector entrepreneurship is especially important in this particular operation because GWP has these quasi-market forces that act upon it and give us an opportunity to be innovative, especially in the rapidly changing area of energy and water and replacement of our infrastructure. It's something that will demand a great deal of attention, so I do look forward to serving with you and for you moving forward. But certainly just wanted to come and say hello and introduce myself to you, and if there's any general questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those. But if not, then we'll be able to see you on a going forward basis at various commission meetings in the coming months. So just wanted to say hi and thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Congratulations. Welcome
Thank you,
aboard.
ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Ochoa.
Next item, please.
Item 4, elections, chair and secretary.
Okay, we'll do this one at a time. We're going to go with the president first. Do we have nominations for president?
I'll nominate Commissioner Zangor-Armenian for president for coming year.
Any others? Okay. No further nomination. Nominations are now closed for the president's position. All in favor of Commissioner Armenian for president, say aye.
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 Okay. No noes. So Commissioner Armenian's elected president. Now we're going to go for secretary. Any? Oh, he wants to speak. There is a speaker card here for Mr. Milano. I apologize. Please.
Thank you, President John. Members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission. I originally wanted to speak before for this particular process, even though I applaud you in the selection of Mr. Armenian. So I have no qualms with the selection. What I wanted to bring up is a practice that I have seen in the selection of, and I think you might want to consider it when next year, as you go through the process of selecting. The practice oftentimes appears at least to me, to some in the general public, to be prearranged, meaning it's somebody's turn and so on. And oftentimes it works well if it is someone who's been on the commission for several years and they got the experience, they know how things work, and it works, fairly well. And I don't mind the whole concept of rotating it and having individuals come forth. What oftentimes bothers me, especially for some commissions, is when the process does not allow the full consideration of others that might have something important in their objective of becoming the chair or the president. And I think it is that spirit, that conviction, that sometimes I think is even more important than the number of years that someone may have spent sitting behind the dais in the role of a commissioner. Sometimes I see the situation where it's such prearranged that someone with very little experience all of a sudden gets nominated and elected, and the process just doesn't seem to be transparent. I think that's problematic. Again, I want to say that I don't have a problem at all with the selection of Mr. Armenian, because I think that there's something truly necessary in this process of selecting someone who has as his or her prerogative the ability to set the agenda for the commission. What I see as a significant problem throughout all the commissions in the city is that it appears as the agenda is given to you and says, this is what you can talk about. And yet, setting the agenda items, making sure that you have the say-so to direct what topics are being brought forward, is one of the most important roles that a chair has. And I don't see it being practiced, especially when we bring issues that are of significant importance and we find that there is no traction on those issues. Nothing is taken forward in a significant way to say, wait a second, the public and the stakeholders are addressing something of importance to us. And as a commissioner, looking at the stakeholders before you, they say, you know, even though the staff may not want it, and even though the city council may not want it, this is an important issue and that is your role. And I think that concept as to what is the purpose of why you are there, why do you choose to become a commissioner, is essential. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about the issues of governance and fairness and transparency and public involvement that constitute a lot of different stakeholders. The stakeholders are the city staff and all the workers in the department. This is one of them. The other stakeholders are the ratepayers and the businesses that pay but oftentimes don't get a chance to come here. The stakeholders is the city council as well. But the stakeholders that oftentimes don't have a voice are the individuals who are maybe working or have a language problem and cannot be here at 4 o'clock. I am an immigrant and I know the immigrant experience and I know what it is to live without and having to struggle. And this is a city that has a lot of people now struggling. And it is my hope, Mr. Armenian, as you take this forward, that you have tens of thousands of stakeholders out there who are having a significant difficulty today managing their day-to-day lives financially, and that they need a voice. And oftentimes that voice takes a secondary role to other voices within the city that are the internal interests that basically drive your agenda. And it is my hope, Mr. Armenian, that as you take this thing forward, that you think very hard about those individuals who are of your ethnicity, who may not have been raised in an environment as prosperous as some of you may have. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment if possible. I just wanted to point out that, you know, every commissioner has the opportunity to present agenda items for our agenda meetings. As long as there's a second commissioner that's willing to second it, then we can bring it. Certainly GWP management does bring certain things that they want to make sure is presented before the commission, but also the commissioners themselves oftentimes bring up a lot of different issues. So I think it's not just the chair's responsibility, but it's every commissioner's responsibility as they see fit to represent the public's interests and make sure that appropriate issues are covered. So I do feel that we do that, and I do feel, you know, chairs prior to my election just now have done that too. I do appreciate Mr. Milano's comments, but this has nothing to do with ethnicity. This has to do with everyone who's a stakeholder in the city on an equal level, on an equal basis, have an interest and a stake in the success of our utility in our city. So I will take your comments to heart, Mr. Milano, but certainly I think I personally feel that this commission has actually driven the agenda just as much as staff has driven the agenda. So, but still appreciate your comments.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move forward. Nominations for secretary, please.
I would also like to nominate Commissioner Deborah Dentler for secretary.
Any other nominations? No? Okay. All those in favor of Commissioner Dentler for secretary, say aye.
Second?
Need a second?
We don't need a second, no.
Aye.
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 Okay,
All
great.
those opposed?
All opposed? Okay, so Commissioner Dentler's elected secretary. This is where we switch, but before I go, I'd like to take a minute to thank everyone, including my fellow commissioners, City Attorney's Office, the General Manager, Mr. Glenn Steiger, and Glendale Water and Power staff for all of your support and assistance the last year. And without your contribution, we would not have been able to have such a productive year. Okay? Thank you very much. Now we're going to switch.
Just move the gavel.
Yeah, we're going to slide this way.
Thank you, fellow commissioners, for your vote of confidence and support, and I look forward to the year ahead in terms of working together as we define the agenda and the important issues that we're going to be dealing with on GWP as we have in the past. So I would like to now move on to agenda number 5, which is reports and strategic plan.
Strategic Plan Quarterly Scoreboard Update, Steve Lenz.
Mr. President, excuse me, members of the Commission, Steve Lenz again, Chief Assistant General Manager of Glendale Water and Power. In your binder, you have a GWP strategy scoreboard for the quarter ended December 31st, 2011. And I'd like to just take a few minutes to walk through some of the highlights. And for me, that's boxes that are either red or green, ones that were ahead of schedule or ones that are a little bit behind. I'd like to start with the section 1.1 there, which is producing 3,856 acre-feet per year from the Verdugo Basin. We are ahead of schedule on that item. The main reason for that is that we've installed the Foothill well, which was placed in service recently, and that increases our Glendale well production in that basin. Section 1.2, and I'll go through these. You can stop me if you like for questions, or we can wait till the end. We do have staff here that can answer more detailed questions about any of the items. Section 1.2 is to serve 2,500 acre-feet per year of recycled water, and we are behind schedule on that, and the primary reason for that is budget. In order to expand that system, we need to be able to pay for that system, and budget has prevented us from doing that to date. The next section I'd like to highlight is section 1.4, which is to reduce water usage by 7% over the 2006 base year. And you've seen several presentations of our conservation programs. They've been particularly effective and have taken us ahead of our goals for that particular strategic initiative. In section 2.1, we have reduced electrical usage by 7%. Once again, we are ahead of schedule on that item, and that's due primarily, once again, to many of the programs that you've seen here before this commission, the public benefit charge programs, which include demand-side management, some of our photovoltaic programs, and also our Ice Bear program, which is a program that we use to shift some of our load to the off-peak. The next section I'd like to highlight is section 2.5, which is mine. It's an Operating Energy Management Resources Group under defined metrics. We are behind schedule on that. Producing those metrics has proved to be more of a challenge than we initially anticipated, and we're estimating about 3 to 6 months to complete that process. We do have a consultant in place. We have some initial metrics that we're working with, and we're trying to finalize those and put those into a model so that we can automate them and have our risk manager monitoring those on a regular basis. Section 4.4 is another item where we are ahead of schedule. This is to reduce our electrical system losses to below 10%. This is due primarily to putting in place some better measurement tools to help us get a better handle on where those losses are in the system. And at this time, we are below that 10%. And once again, if we want to get into details on that, I believe we can have Ramon answer questions. Section 5.2 and 5.3, replacing and rehabilitating 25 miles of pipe and implementing effective asset management. We are behind schedule on both of these. They are water items, and as you might expect, those are budget-driven. That's the reason why, primarily why we're behind schedule on those. Section 6.3, another budget-driven item, is initiative to convert distribution feeders from 4 kV to 12 kV. We are behind schedule, and once again, that's budget-driven. We are working to get that back on schedule, but until we can get our budget in order, we will be behind schedule. Section 7.2 is to have less than a 5% vacancy rate, and this metric does not include hourlies. We actually are using a great deal of hourly personnel at this time to make up for vacancies, which reduces that rate from 8% down to 3%. But because we don't include hourlies in this metric, we technically are not meeting that goal. And we are looking for ways to fill those positions with full-time employees. Section 7.3, achieve annual utility average OSHA incident rate of 2.0 or less. We are engaging in further review of accident reports, and our incident rate for November and December was 0. So we're continuing to work on that, but at this point in time, we are not below that metric of 2.0. And 7.4, which is to have 0 preventable vehicle accidents each year, we are not reaching that metric. However, just this week, we're beginning hands-on safe driver training for all of our drivers. So we're making strides to reach that goal. We're not there yet. Section 8.1 is implementing smart grid maturity model. We're ahead of schedule on that, and that's primarily related to, with our update of the strategic plan, we included a whole new section on smart grid maturity model, which has all 9 of those areas, and we basically are ahead of all of our goals in each of those initiatives to take us ahead of schedule. 8.2, citywide, operate GWP within a citywide GIS. We brought in a consultant on this project to help us with file conversion, which was going to take us a long time to do internally, and that's really sped up the process and taken us ahead of schedule. 8.3 is our next red box, implementing new Department of Finance processes for GWP transactions. This is a strategic initiative that Bill Fox started before he left, but then we did have that transition, and now Mike Bell has added this to his work plan, and he's working through the issues, but we are behind the initial schedule that we set for that. Finally, Section 9.4 was planned to develop a comprehensive outreach plan. The plan has been approved. This is an addition to the plan for action checklists, which are in final review. So we do plan, I guess we won't be catching up on that since it was due December 2011, but we're back on track. So that's the highlights of where we're ahead of and behind schedule. So I guess at this point I'll open it up for questions.
Yes. With the water items that are delayed due to budget, my question is, with the latest water rate increase proposal that was approved by City Council, how will that change these projects? Like, for instance, the first one that you mentioned was the recycled water, okay, served 2,500 acre-feet recycled water. That's behind due to budget. The second one was, another one that I see is like the replace, rehabilitate 25 miles of pipe. That's due to budget as well. With the water rate increase proposal approved by City Council, will that speed those things up?
Commissioner Chan, I'll have Peter Kavunas come to the podium to give you some detail on those projects.
Good evening. President Armenian, members of the Commission, Peter Kavunas, Assistant General Manager for Water. As you'll hear later this evening in the presentation, the City Council has not yet taken action on water rates. That action was deferred until March 20th. and you'll get a little more detailed explanation as to why that was necessary and appropriate. At the same time, I think the essence of your question is what happens if we get the rate increase. And the answer is the proposed rate increase, the proposed rate redesign and revenue increase gives us minimally more revenue. And as we presented in the discussions to City Council and the Commission, it does not include, in the capital program for the next 5 years, it does not include recycled water projects or anywhere near the level of water main rehabilitation projects that we thought was necessary. The CIP program that's being proposed is very modest, and it'll keep us going, but doesn't fully fund projects that are necessary.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
I have a question for Mr. Linz. Because we had the new manager come to say hello today, this question has been on my mind. How will staff begin reporting to the new city manager so that he gets up to speed quickly? And he has a lot to master, but looking at the scoreboard, I think it's a really good overview, a really good visual tool, and I would hope that this will be going to the manager same time it comes to us or whenever it's finished.
Commissioner Dentler, members of the Commission, we have already had several meetings with City Manager Ochoa. He is meeting with the Assistant General Managers individually, and we're highlighting all of our priorities and all of the areas that we're working on. In addition to that, we are sending him bi-monthly reports now for all of our areas. And when these reports come out through that process, they will be distributed to him either through the bi-monthly or through our individual meetings. So
that's great to hear, and I thought you would probably answer that way. And on that note, I just had two other thoughts, and maybe I'll squeeze them in now because this is the only place on the agenda that I think that they fit concerning the new manager. I know maybe it's unusual and outside the norm, but given the budget crisis that we're in and the importance of the rate increase and the deliberativeness that City Council is bringing to that, et cetera, I would really urge staff to make sure that the city manager is really well briefed, and I know that you will. But when I came on board this commission, I found it very useful to do two things, which I would hope that maybe you have time to do with the new manager. One is to have George take him on the fantastic tour through all of the departments. It was very comprehensive. George already has the script that he prepared for me. It was very helpful and brought me right in touch with the different department heads and the lower level staff, saw the whole layout of the building, and opportunity to answer my questions on that one-on-one basis. And secondly, in addition to getting the scoreboard, I thought it would be I'd like to see the new city manager periodically pop in for some of our deliberations here on the commission. I didn't want to bring that up while he was here, but that would be my suggestion, is it would help him get up to speed with the point of view of the public and of those of us who are here representing the public's interest. And I think it would be great to welcome him to sit in. I know he's going to be a busy guy, but I'd like to suggest that maybe he comes see our commission proceedings once in a while.
Commissioner Dentley, appreciate those comments. And we actually have already given City Manager Ochoa a tour of our major facilities in December before he even started.
I'm sure.
And I could tell you on the water side, and I'm sure Peter can confirm this, there has been exhaustive briefings with the city manager and staff and the council members on the water rate issues.
I'm sure.
And then finally, on getting him in here occasionally, I'm sure that we can arrange that.
Yeah. Briefings are great, and I'm sure, of course, you're doing a bang-up job with that. There's nothing like going out and seeing the facilities and the infrastructure, and particularly when it comes to our questions about things like infrastructure, maintenance, repair. A lot of these things really are some things you have to see with your own eyes, and I think the tours are really important. Thanks.
Agreed.
Any other questions? I have a few questions, if I may. On the power infrastructure section, so first of all, a general comment, I am a little bit concerned on the amount of red here in terms of below expectations, but more specifically under power infrastructure. I understand the water infrastructure with regard to the water rates and the budgetary issues there. On the electrical side, in terms of conversion to 12 kV, kind of what are the reasons we're behind?
Mr. President, I'll have Ramona Bueg, the AGM of Electric Distribution, come up and give you some detail on those projects.
Good evening, President Arminian, members of the Commission, Ramona Bueg, Assistant General Manager. The reason for that is when we developed the strategic plan, we were working off of assuming we could do 7 feeders a year based on the current financial situation at that time. The rate we're going, we had planned that we would be completed by year 2027 if we're able to do that. But due to budgetary constraints, we are down to doing 2 feeders a year, so we have not stopped the conversion or the improvements in the infrastructure, but we're not just doing it as fast as we had hoped we could. The first 5 years of our conversion, those of you that were here, if you recall, we had a rate increase and we also had some bond financing to help us out. And we thought we could sustain that work, and we were not able to because of our budget constraints.
Can you elaborate in terms of the impact of the windstorm, as that may have on anything having to do with that sort of infrastructure, since that's an unexpected event?
Yeah, that's on item number 5.
In terms of how it impacts the strategic plan.
In terms of, I would say none. What we're doing is we have maximized, I believe, what we can get out of all the improvements that we have. Windstorms, earthquakes, things that we can't predict, it's hard to really plan for that except to respond accordingly and restore power. But none of the improvements we're doing would have helped in the windstorm that we had. A lot of our systems are designed to withstand that kind of wind, but the trees aren't. A lot of the problems that we suffered were due to the trees falling on our power lines. So there's things that we can control. Those that we're able to control, we've managed to keep those pretty reliable.
And then I have a question under workforce that you may be able to answer as well, which has to do with the safety issue. On all the categories, we're pretty much in the red. So both on the OSHA and the preventable accidents, can you elaborate in terms of what has forced us to be behind goal on that?
Yeah, what we're trying to do on those, we're trying to address the preventable outages and the root causes and try to attack them, like on the vehicle accidents, like Steve Lins had pointed out. We have a very high number or unacceptable number of vehicle accidents. So one of the things we're doing, this week we're actually having 4 or 5 members of GWP being trained to be a trainer themselves, so we can do a year-round training of all our employees. Rather than doing remedial training, we're actually going to be proactive and just have them train. I believe that was suggested by either you or Commissioner Yao in the last meeting, and we're implementing something similar.
But what I wanted to get a sense, I mean, the goal is it's a pretty tough bar to meet, which is 0 preventable accidents. Are we 1, which we'd be behind goal, or are we 10, 20 vehicle accidents?
I think on a monthly basis, it could vary, but last month we had 2. What we'd like to do is to address the preventables, and majority of the accidents we've had were backing-related accidents, and we're trying to get them to do more of a partnership, to have somebody to really watch their back because that's a lot of blind spots that they had to deal with. Not an excuse, it's preventable, so we're trying to address that.
But can you provide an actual number?
I'm sorry?
Can you provide an actual year-to-date number?
We'll do that. I don't have it in front of me, but we report that on a monthly basis. I just don't have it memorized.
Okay. I'd appreciate that for follow-up. And then on the OSHA, how many injuries are we talking about there?
We didn't have any, like Steve pointed out, we didn't have any in the past 2 months. But what we count on those are in terms of incident reporting is number of lost work days, and that's what we're tracking. And it's improving, but we're just not meeting the goal that we have. Okay. And on that note, too, when an accident does happen, if you're not familiar with our safety policy, we have what's called an accident review committee that we form to review accidents and determine whether it's preventable, non-preventable. If it is preventable, what's the root cause and how do we address it so that it doesn't happen again? So we're very proactive on that. Additionally, we have on our monthly safety meetings, we address all the incidents that occurred and try to review that with staff to make sure that we don't repeat the same mistake if it's preventable. If it's not preventable, then we also look for what are the contributing factors and try to address those.
Okay. Well, I might later on when we get to setting future agenda, I think personally I'd like to see us maybe do a more comprehensive deep dive on safety, because that's the number one issue above all else. So I'd like to propose that later on.
And President Armenian, in the meantime, we will send you out the metrics that we have for those 4 categories, in the next week or so to you and the entire commission.
That'd be great. The other thing, I know you said you're back on plan on 9.4, which is a comprehensive outreach plan. In terms of getting the plan, you're back on plan, even though it was due in December. That's another one I think that might be worth in the future, maybe actually presenting the plan so that the public can know about it as well.
Okay. We can do that.
I'll bring it up under new business, future agenda forecast. Any other questions?
Yeah, actually, I have a couple of comments regarding the scoreboard, not so much questions. One of the things I remember in previous reviews of the scoreboard is that I remember hearing that you guys do either an annual or a semi-annual review, and you may adjust or change some of these goals or deadlines. One of the things I'm looking at here, for example, some of these items that are to be finished by 2023, 2027, 2019, these have been on there for the past at least 3-4 quarters, and it seems like there is not much happening. So are you guys looking at this and saying, do we need to actually reassess if this is an actual goal that we need to change and not review or report in red for the next 3-4 years? Because the way it's looking like right now with the financial situation of the utility, I don't think these are going to be either caught up or on time. And then 2, I think this is probably the 3rd time I'm asking this. Can you guys please, on the items that are red, put some sort of a date indicating how far off you guys are on these goals, whether it's 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, whatever. So when we review these later on, we can see if those dates have moved. Just because it's red, we don't know what that means. I think that's my 3rd request, so I would appreciate it if next time we see this, we have some sort of indication on those items.
Okay, I appreciate that. On the reassessment, we do reassess annually. On many of these initiatives, they break down into sub-initiatives, and we are working on all of them. Every year we do look at them. I'm trying to think, for example, some of mine, upgrade transmission system, let's see here, let me get back to, power supply, reduce greenhouse gas to 1990 emissions by 2020. There's a number of steps in that process, including the renewable portfolio standard, and we are working on this diligently, and we have several sub-initiatives that we're moving forward, and so those are on track, even though all you're seeing is this very long term goal. They are on track, and they are reviewed every year, and the schedules are adjusted, and things that have been completed for a period of time are dropped off as well.
I'm talking mainly about the items in red. Everything is in green and yellow, I understand, but the items in red that are postponed, specifically, I think we should get a little more detail on the items in red.
Okay, I see what you're saying. We can do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just on a clarification, for the dates as put on the scorecard, because for power supply under Mr. Lin's, like 2.5 and 2.6, it's kind of misleading, or I'm not sure where you go when you put in a date that's already passed. I mean, what is the next step if the goal hasn't been met? Do you revise the date of the new goal, or how do you plan on reconciling that?
We do at the annual review. We will take a look at how it's going, and we may, for example, we'll revise that date, showing, updating what we think our current anticipation is to complete the project.
Would there be a reconciliation and maybe a proposal on why those two items are in red, for example, and why the new dates will be proposed? Can somebody come back and let us know what, let's say, for example, 2.5 and 2.6 on the power supply, since the objective date was July 2011, couldn't someone indicate why the scorecard is below expectation or didn't meet schedule, and what the new schedule would be like? Couldn't there be a separate report on that?
We can certainly come back after our annual adjustments and let you know why they were made. I mean, these dates and the time estimates and forecasts are really more art than science, because this is a 5-year plan, and some of these, as you noted, or some of the commission noted, go way out. And so we make our best educated guesses, given that we break down these projects as how long it's going to take. And for example, the trading metrics, I can tell you, we thought we could get done quicker, but when you got into it and started breaking down wholesale versus retail and what type of metrics you're going to use and how you're going to put it into a system, it's just much more complicated than we anticipated. So
and that's fine.
We can certainly come back after our annual reassessment to you and give you, once again, some of the highlights and lowlights, I'll call them, of the things that we're behind on, and let you know why they were adjusted and what we think the new target dates are, so that you guys can have a better idea of what's going on, almost like a strikeout underline of a document, so you can kind of see the before and after.
Yeah, that would be good, because let's say, for example, 2.6, where September 2011 you were in red, but then suddenly in December, everything should be in red because it's below expectation or way behind schedule. Because
I'm sorry, say that again. 2.6.
2.6 external
transmission review.
For example, yes.
Right.
Anything after July 2011 is going to be in red because it's behind schedule, and so suddenly December of 2011 you have it yellow again.
Yeah,
that's
it's done now. That's why, it's now done.
But it's still behind schedule.
Right. That's true.
So that's something that needs to be clarified, as Commissioner Jemin was mentioning, that it would be nice to know some of the references behind it, too.
Actually, I would like to make a suggestion, if my colleagues agree. I think with these scoreboards, we should get a one-pager of all the items in red, and maybe you guys can say a couple of sentences about each of them, saying this is why it's delayed, and this is what we expect to happen, just for the red items. That way, we could have a one-sheet quick review of everything, and I think some of the things will be much clearer, and it'll be our record of why, what the situation may be.
I was going to make the exact same suggestion, so I think we're all thinking alike, and not because we're not because we're critical of staff for having things being in red that are beyond their control, budget problems. Some things are beyond one's control and some are not. But having a separate sheet just focusing on red, I think would be helpful to us, it would be helpful to the public, it would be helpful to the city manager. I don't know that we need any more documents drawn up or any more meeting time with you telling us how laudable it is, that things are in green. We want to hear good news, but we can see the greens on the scoreboard. But the quick scoreboard creates an automatic concerns about how many red squares there are. So we should be able to turn to our red sheet and get that drilled down data. And I think that would reduce questioning time and would be a useful separate document for public and staff and commission.
It would also help to, I think, explain kind of how critical of a red is it? Is it a red because we missed, a target date by a month, or is it red as in we're really behind on a project because of budgetary issues that need to be solved? So it kind of helps us prioritize the discussion as well, so we can focus in on the things that are most critical to the operation of the utility.
Exactly, and then we don't have to be constantly asking every meeting, well, is that, the water, the replacement of pipe? We ask about that repeatedly, and it takes up a lot of meeting time. We should be able to just see that, a reminder every time we see the scoreboard that, oh yeah, it's not in the budget, it's not going to be in the budget for a long time.
Okay, we can, we'll take your suggestions and have an internal discussion and try to figure out the best way to highlight the reds for you. But we do think it's important for you to see the strategic plan in the context of the entire strategic plan, which is this 2 pages. Because
No question.
we don't want you to only see the red. We want you to see also
Yeah, no,
where we're on
absolutely.
track, because the scope of this plan is quite broad. So we would like you to see the whole
We all
picture.
agree with that.
That's why I'm not sure we want a separate one with just the reds, because I like to see how it's presented here now. It's just that I was maybe suggesting to take some ownership on this commission rather than delving into staff, is maybe have one of us, make each of us take some items, let's say if I take 1 and 2, and then I focus on those, and then I work with staff to make sure that, to fully understand what that's about, and then report back to the commission so that we take ownership of it rather than having staff going through each detail. So that's just a suggestion, instead of going through all the reds, that just...
I don't think anybody's suggesting that we don't see this. We're just looking for a one-page cheat sheet of the reds. That's really it, with the 1 or 2 sentences on each item. Nothing overboard.
More information.
And I think there are two different issues that Commissioner Yao is saying. I think you're saying a one-pager with some more information to kind of help explain some of the reds. I think what Commissioner Yao is saying, I think, is worthy of a separate discussion to see if we want to do a deeper dive as individual commissioners on our own time and meet with the appropriate officials in those areas to understand those areas better.
Yeah, instead of taking the commission's time and delving into different ones that we're interested in, might as well have a summary of all the reports, and then we can report back, each of us can report back on what makes sense and what it is that we need to focus on, rather than having staff explain each one, and specifically reds or yellows.
And just to clarify, I think what you're looking for on each of the reds is why is it behind schedule and when will it be done? Is that...
Well, also some sort of help in prioritizing it, in terms of, is this a really severe red, or is it a red because we missed, for example, the community outreach plan by a month, but we have the plan now, versus, let's say, on the feeders, at this rate, are we going to be woefully behind our goal by the time, we get to 2027 at this rate? Because we were scheduled to do X number a year, but now we're down to X number a year because of budgetary constraints.
We can take a stab at it. We'll see how it works, and if we want to change it again to make it work better, we'll just keep working on it until we get it to a point that it works for you guys.
And actually, to further that argument, because this is scored by staff, it'd be helpful if each commissioner takes on some of these items and actually help staff identify why it should be green or red or yellow, because staff can score this as a green, where if you go a deeper dive in it, you might think that it's a yellow or worthy of a red, because the commissioner, I think that it's not really a green because of certain metrics or whatever the situation is. So it would be helpful for the commission to take more ownership of this, to help staff score it so that the public understand that, okay, we got buy-in that this should be a green, yellow, or red, rather than having staff evaluate based on what they think should be a green, red, or yellow.
Is there a legal ramification of that, or of that suggestion, as far as us getting involved in identifying these as green, yellow, or red, or
the ranking of these?
Well, commissioners, one ramification is that you serve as an advisory commission. You don't direct the conduct of staff, so I see potential implications there depending on what that level of review looked like. Certainly, I think it'd be appropriate if you, as individual members of the commission, wanted to, get involved in particular areas and learn more about them, and even report back to this commission. That would be fine, as long as it's tied to an advisory role, and as long as there's no more than 2 commissioners that are looking at any individual item because of Brown Act issues.
Did the commission want to take up the issue of Commissioner Yao's suggestion now? Or
Well,
do we want to
can't,
agendize it?
Yeah, well, we certainly couldn't take action on that today, but we could agendize it for a future meeting if there's more than one commissioner that's interested in this
Okay,
suggestion.
so let's keep that in mind when we get to the end of today's agenda.
Can I ask one last question on the previous point about the scoreboard and how to give us a little bit more depth? When we get the laptops, if we're still going to the, not the laptops, I'm sorry, the iPads, when we go to that new technology, if that's still in the pipeline, is it possibly as feasible in time to be able to do something like click on the reds and dive down and see a little more data, such as we really didn't have any accidents in December, these questions that we ask, turn that into actual data for us. Would we be able to potentially embed that data into the squares and swipe on it?
We do have the full spreadsheet that's available at the back of the strategic plan, which breaks each of these initiatives down into their sub-projects. I don't think we currently have anything in greater detail than that, and we could spend a lot of time, producing that and going through that with you. It could be a lot of time. Most of these are either date or simple metric driven. I don't think it's as vague as it may appear here, but it's do this by this date or meet this metric, and either you're at the number, you're at the date. So I guess I'm a little concerned about diving too deeply into this, because we could spend an excruciating number of hours going through this, and I'm not sure how helpful it would be for all of us.
Let me suggest we take the first step, which is we're really talking about a third page or fourth page to something like this that would say, here are some notes on the
highlight
reds.
the reds.
Yeah, some commentary, color commentary on the reds, no pun intended, to explain the reds a little bit further and put it in some sort of context so that we know what are the serious reds and what are just like some reds because we missed
Some of the explanations are going to stay consistent meeting to meeting to meeting, because some of them are simply going to be almost in the nature of a footnote that carries over in the document for a year or more. If there's always going to be a budget crisis that's going to affect our ability to replace the pipes for the foreseeable future, so that just stays in the data unchanged.
I appreciate that comment, and I really would appreciate if we could start there and try to do something simple that meets your needs instead of getting into a spreadsheet with all the data.
No, we understand.
I'd like to add my comments. I'd like to continue to see this, the three-pager, and I'd like to continue to hear your comments on every one. I thought that was helpful. And I agree that having a separate page with just the red and expanding it a little bit more, indicating what the new date will be and really what were the issues, but still summarize it and not really go really deep.
Yeah, I think we could do that.
Yeah, I think that that would satisfy my needs. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
We do have one public speaker, Mr. Milano.
Commission President Armenian, members of the Commission, my name is Herbert Molano. I believe that the original intent in the initiative by Mr. Steiger to bring forward this a strategic plan to you in this format, I think it's an excellent idea because it's driving precisely your conversation today. And I think that GWP has to be commended for taking this kind of initiative, because it's the only place where I see it actually happening, where it's actually reporting and saying, look, these things we were not able to meet, here are the reds and yellows and so on. I have I think many of you commented on exactly the same observation I had. Because I'm in the business of selling software to medium to large size companies, what you and Ms. Dentler presented today and the questions concerning can you drill down is a very common thing. There are software packages available for practically every software out there where you can actually done precisely to do that. You click on it and you get an immediate drill down, particularly when it comes to dashboards and KPIs. It's a very common thing. It's available for practically every platform. For you to expect that, I think, is well within the bounds of what you do as commissioners, to expect some clarity with regard to what were the metrics that led to this particular number. And it is on those metrics that I'd like to address something. On section 5.2 of this strategic plan, you have the issue concerning water. And even though I brought in the PDF that was presented to us in the public with regard to the state of the water mains, I took the freedom of giving to you a copy of the history of the water mains installations. And along with that, I also created a document, not so accurate as I wanted to do it, but it's got some rounding errors. But it is basically pulled from the cash flow statements of the Glendale Water and Power financials for you to see how this relates to this. And the reason why I brought it is because I think that this is the kind of reporting that may give you clarity of the problems and the severity of a backlog of infrastructure. Throughout the whole country, we have significant problems in infrastructure. It appears to be like it's the last thing that we take care of. And so, if you were to look at this particular chart, you will see, for example, in the year 2000, well, first of all, in this one, it shows you that from the year 2000 through 2007, no water mains were installed. It's right there on this section. And then if you look at the cash flow, you see that the city in the year 2000 barely had $100,000 in its beginning cash balance for the water fund. It's an astonishing number. And then even though cash from operations came to $6.6 million, we still removed and transferred to the general fund almost $3 million. There it is in the year 2000. And we wound up with a cash balance of $1.1 million. So you would ask the question, if you were receiving this kind of graph and this type of strategic plan, and if you had been in the Glendale Water and Power Commission back in the year 2000, would you, under those circumstances, have recommended a transfer? No person in the right mind would have done that, considering that the last time the city failed to produce any or lay any pipe was in 1942, the year of the war, of the Second World War. And even then, during the war years, we're still able to even have sufficient funds to be able to do it. What was so significant that occurred during these years that prevented an adequate investment in the laying out of water mains? So if you look at the year 2001, we started with $1.1 million and ended up with a cash balance of nearly zero. And yet, the city still demanded a transfer from the Glendale Water and Power to the general fund of $3.1 million. And it is my hope that when you are looking at these indicators, that we really get a nice rounded summary of what the real state of the infrastructure is for the major items. You know, you have pumps, you have valves, you have the reservoirs. You have about 6 major items that which you should know how old is that stuff and how much are we delaying the infrastructure investment. And then you will have the justification to say, given the circumstances, we have no rationale for having approved the transfer or recommending a transfer to the Glendale City Council. And I think it is in that light that I think these reports are really valuable in summary form. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next agenda item, GWP wanted to take a quick picture of the reshuffled seats here of the commission. So if I could allow the want us seated, assume.
Get closer.
Thank you. We will now move on to agenda number 5B, quarterly risk management.
Okay, comments on the speaker?
Yeah.
Just a few comments about the metrics and the indicator for the scoreboard in the future, because the comment was about recommendation to transfer funds to the city council, to the general fund. I don't think we have that awareness that when those things take place, that we don't make those recommendations. Would it be best for this commission to consider making those recommendations when the time comes? Because I know that the general manager speaks with the city manager and they agreed upon the amount. But can there be some input as an advisory board to make a recommendation based on what we see in the commission when the time comes to whether transfer or how much? Can that be done?
You could certainly make that kind of a recommendation. I should point out, though, that the way it's worded in the charter, it's a recommendation, it's a mandatory transfer unless the city council makes findings that the budget won't support such a transfer. So this commission isn't directly involved in that process. You could certainly make that kind of a recommendation, but you should, I'm sure that you're also aware that there is no longer any transfer, certainly from the water side, so that's no longer at issue whatsoever.
Yeah, but for the electric side, so anytime there's a future transfer, could we also have a motion to recommend based on how much and why?
As part of your consideration, I would think of the budget and of the operations of the department, you can absolutely make a recommendation to the city manager as far as what you deem appropriate.
When does that take place, and how would best we can do that?
Well, the budget is approved generally in June, and I believe it starts being presented to the council thereabouts, perhaps in May or in May of each year. So, that would be coming up in the next few months. Is that? I'll defer to Mr. Lenz.
That's correct. It is handled through the budgeting process, but we can figure out what an appropriate date would be for you to to make a recommendation to council.
And if the commission thinks that's appropriate to review, or at least provide some input to the general manager and the city manager on whether that would have any impact on the budget or the operations of the electric side.
I think that would be appropriate. I would second that. Okay. If no other comments on the strategic plan, then we'll move on to item 5B, quarterly risk management update.
Quarterly risk management update, Mike Bell.
Thank you, George. President Armenian, members of the Commission, my name is Mike Bell. I would like to thank you for your indulgence last quarter in providing me with some time to get my feet on the ground and become familiar with the risk management area. I've got a brief presentation for you this evening on the quarterly update. George, if you go to the first slide, please. Over the last couple months, what I've done is familiarize myself with the policies, the procedures and such in this area. So I'd like to report to you this evening on where we're at and where we're headed. I started out with looking at the energy risk management policy as it exists. Went back to the last internal audit report, which was produced in 2006. And after reviewing those documents, had a series of meetings with individuals involved in the risk area, from the traders, marketers, and schedulers, to the back office finance and accounting operations, as well as the audits, the internal audit staff, city's legal counsel, and the contractors that the city employs in this area. So with that as a background, I would like to, in this next slide, this came from a presentation that was made to the Commission some time ago, but I thought it would be helpful in terms of highlighting the different areas of the policy and the different participants in the risk management area. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just as a quick note, the front office operations are essentially the contracting, the scheduling, the trading group. The middle office are the compliance, the risk management, measurement, reporting area. And the back office are basically the accounting and transaction, the functional analysis. It's important to note that the city employs 3 different consultants with regard to these operations. The first one being TEA, which is the Energy Authority. They provide help to the front office in terms of hedge strategies and parameters, and they also assist the front office in executing that strategy. The second firm, which is Risk Management Incorporated, provides much of the middle office guidance and tracking and reporting. They serve a very important role in this process as an independent, objective review with a considerable amount of experience in the area. And then finally, ACES is also providing middle office guidance as it pertains to credit evaluations and counterparty credit analysis, very specialized, and essentially produce reports every day in that particular area. So with that as background, my findings and observations based on the analysis are that the policies and procedures are being adhered to. There were no violations of any of the policies noted. However, it was noted that some minor updates to the policy would be appropriate. Some things have changed in the environment and in the markets, and I think that it's an appropriate time to review the policy and perhaps make some changes. I also noted that some of the reporting although it's done, wasn't necessarily always done in a timely fashion. And that's one of the things that, as I'm moving forward here, you'll see that we will correct and make certain that happens. So the overall assessment really is that no violations of the policy. There's some things that could probably be tidied up a little bit and timing-wise be done a little bit more expediently. Actions to be taken. Just today, we've started the program assessment of risk management. This came as a result of the Energy Risk Management Committee's meeting recently. So what we're going to do here is Risk Management Incorporated, the City Internal Audit Group, and myself are going to work through each of the front, middle, and back office areas. We've sent a list of questions and items that we'd like to review to each of the participants in those areas. And once we receive their comments back, we plan to meet with them individually. In addition to that, the internal audit group within the city has scheduled an internal audit of the entire risk management function this summer. There's some other auditing taking place with regard to the NERC WEC process, and they would like to see that completed before going in and imposing yet another audit on some of these same people. So that is scheduled for this summer. And then as part of this process, what we would do is take a look at the policy and come back to the Commission with some recommended changes and adjustments based upon this work. My thought is the risk management assessment can probably be done before the next quarterly meeting. Obviously, the internal audit function wouldn't be done until sometime this summer, but they are participating in this assessment, so I think it would be helpful in that regard. So I guess in conclusion, things look to be pretty good, although we're going to peel a little bit deeper in to this. The last time the policy was updated was 2009, so it's an appropriate time to take another look at it and bring it up to date with where we are today. So with that, be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions?
Well, thank you, Mr. Bell, and welcome back.
Thank you.
So it looks like you did some due diligence and find there's no violations, but you mentioned that there were some needs for minor updates. Could you elaborate on some of those needed changes?
Yeah, actually, my last slide, which wasn't slipped my mind, so thank you for prompting me. There's one thing that's come to light in terms of short-term buying from restricted counterparties. There are limitations on trading activities that can take place with certain restricted counterparties. And mostly that's in place so that the city is not at risk of, say, selling power to an entity that may not have the wherewithal to pay for those transactions. The trading group would like for us to look at the possibility of authorizing transactions with counterparties where the city could potentially purchase energy from that party, and thereby it would be a responsibility of the city to pay. So with the energy in hand, the risk to the city of that counterparty is not the same as if the city were selling power and then waiting for a payment. So that's one of the things that we've been asked to take a look at. Also want to look at the reporting requirements and the frequency of some of these reports, just to make sure that they're valid. And then beyond that, certain items such as hedging strategies, which I think, given what's happened with gas prices and the fact that they are as low as they are, we may want to reevaluate some of the target levels that we have given today's market, because it's quite a bit different than what it was even 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, thank you for the elaboration on that. There's also, I have some question about reporting. What are the risks of not reporting it timely, and what are these reports for?
Most of the reports that I would say are important or critical to day-to-day activities, such as the counterparty credit analysis, are performed regularly, and in that case on a daily basis. Some of the less frequent reports, like an annual report to this group and to the City Council, haven't always been done on a timely basis. It's not that they haven't been completed, they just haven't been done on a timely basis. And there are some other examples of that as I went through the process. I didn't find that any of them were not done, but I think if it's in the policy that it should be done by a certain date, that policy should be adhered to, or the policy should be adjusted if it's appropriate to make a change.
But they're not necessarily being used by counterparties or any other people to determine our credit or determine our liabilities?
In fact, what I found was particularly the work that RMI and ACES and TEA are doing, and their pieces are right on target in terms of the reporting and the work that's being done. And those are critical pieces. Also, the back office function in terms of payments. Obviously, there are significant penalties if those transactions are not done on a timely basis, and those appear to be pretty tight also.
Are there any other reporting that the city or you would recommend that they be done for more transparency or for risk management?
In addition to what's being done, not really, but I think, again, it would be appropriate to take a look at the timing and the distribution of some of these reports and the usefulness. Frankly, when I first started to look at it, I was a little concerned because I wasn't able to put my finger on some of this information immediately. But what I found was in getting to the right individuals and asking the right questions, the information that I was looking for was in fact there. But it should be, as you're suggesting, it should be right there on the dates that it's identified, and you shouldn't have to go searching for some of this. So I guess as I evolved in the process, like I say, I think at first I was a little bit concerned, but then as I spent time researching and digging the information out, I found that it was there.
Is there another way to present these reports or findings where the public or people on this commission or council can understand easily where the risks are and what our exposures are to the city or to GWP? Is there something like a dashboard or metrics where we can see those things, how much exposures the city has for any particular trade or hedge?
Yes and no. Some of that information is confidential, and in fact, it would be best that it's not publicly available information. But that's all the more reason, I think, for some of these periodic reports to have more of a discussion, and instead of showing the actual transaction sheets and the documents that may contain information that involves trading activities and strategies and such.
Not necessarily. I was
Generic.
going towards. Yeah, I was thinking of the public companies that there was 10Ks and 10Qs annual reports where they consolidate those information. So it wouldn't be any proprietary information. It's more for a summary. It's like this is what we did. This like the revenue and cost that Mr. Milano gave us. Is so lay out the cash flow and some exposures that the city has, and whether that could be public, and to help us understand that if there's anything that happens, then this is our exposure. It could bankrupt the city or not, or what percentage that is going to be.
Again, I think at least insofar as the annual reports are concerned, and perhaps even on a quarterly basis, that would be appropriate on a high level.
Okay, so you're recommending that moving forward, we'll have more frequent and timely reporting.
Absolutely.
Is that quarterly and annually or monthly too?
Well, insofar as the reports that are used by the middle office, the trading and the back office, those are right down to daily reports. But I think the ones that you're referring to in terms of a broader audience, quarterly would probably be an appropriate fashion, and definitely the annual report needs to be done in a timely fashion.
So when is the next report we expect to be to this commission to be?
I would expect the next quarterly report. I would return with the results of this assessment that we're working on right now, and then the one after that, the internal audit group, we would have the results of. So I see this as an ongoing process that the next quarterly update will likely have the results of, we will have the results of that assessment and suggestions with regard to any changes that may be appropriate for the policy itself.
Great, thank you.
Any other comments from Commission? We do have a public speaker, Mr. Milano.
Commission President Armenian, members of the Glendale Water and Power Commission, my name is Herbert Molano. As I was listening just now, I wasn't intending on speaking on this item, but a thought did come to mind that the level of risk could be incredibly substantial, especially if there are projections that are being made and the hedging that is being done against those projections are off. If I recall correctly, it was several months ago that one of the senior managers of the Glendale Water and Power was given a substantial raise for his performance. And I believe, if I may be incorrect here, having to do with the performance, having to do with this type of trading activity that takes place. And I always wondered, what was the measure used for that pay raise? Are we doing substantially better than other cities? Because we're all, at least for electricity, we belong to the Southern California Association of Public Power, or the Public Power Authority. So if we belong to the same group, we buy in as a group, are we doing substantially better than they are? So that you could determine to see if there's a performance measure here as far as this type of complex activity, to see if we're doing any better than other entities in Southern California, to have a gauge as to, whether we are, our risk is equivalent to theirs, or our loss is equivalent to theirs, or if we're actually doing any better than the other utilities nearby. I think that it would be nice to have on a monthly basis at least some of the balances of these particular hedge funds that the city has, so you can get a month-to-month idea as to whether the trend is downward or getting better. I was looking at the financial reports for the electric utility for 2001 and saw an astonishing number with regard to what was at that time the cash balance or the fluid activity of and what Glendale had in its current assets. And it was upwards of $160 million. Now, it piqued my interest. I didn't do a follow-up to figure out what happened to that significant amount of money that the city earned during the Enron days and how the public was impacted by these very high utility rates and where we're selling electricity. But I think that getting month-to-month balances on these funds, I think would be very would highlight a lot of things with regard to this risk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That reminds me of something. Sorry, an additional comment that in the past we've been requesting, at least I've been requesting, whether that the hedging process and modeling is generating revenue for the city and how that compares to if we were buying it on the open market. And so since we have 2 years' worth of data, is there a way we can go back and request that this model be, I guess, go back to provide us some feedback loop on whether the hedging strategy are working and whether we're making money on it?
Mr. President, excuse me, members of the Commission, that's exactly what the trading metrics effort is doing. It is actually a backcast. It looks at what would your energy have cost if you did nothing but just buy at market every day on a snapshot, and that data is fed into the model. And then they go back and compare that to what our group actually did and shows you how they performed compared to a market, we'll call it, benchmark. And that will be the output of that trading metrics effort. I know from drafts that I've seen that our group has performed quite well, as opposed to a benchmark of just buying day to day at market prices. And that has to do with, some of their hedging strategies and with some of their, optimization strategies related to the assets that we have and where they are. But that will be available at the end of that trading metrics process.
Can that be presented to this commission monthly or quarterly just to see where we are compared to the hedging strategies?
Sure.
It would be good for the public to know that Glendale Water and Power is doing its best to make money or saving money for the ratepayers if the strategy is working. Might as well publicize that.
Yeah, and that was the goal of the trading metrics effort, was to present that to the commission and to the public and give them a level of comfort that what they're doing is adding value to the customers of Glendale Water and Power.
So when can we see that? The next opportunity that we can see it?
Well, as I mentioned, we're probably 3 to 6 months away from final completion of that work and the modeling for that work, and it's the modeling that's holding back the schedule. But that's the best estimate that I have today is the 3 to 6 months before we're completely done with the trading metrics work. It's a lot of data because they do take a snapshot every day of, power moving forward on several indexes, and that has to get built into a model.
Yeah, because I was expecting even last year of 2009, 2010 on those metric or benchmarks on how well we did, just based on the past 2 years. So we're saying that another 3 to 6 months.
I believe from the work that I've seen that it does go back 5 years. I'll have to confirm that, but my recollection is that the work that they've done. It models 5 years worth of data. So you'll be able to see when the work's done how they did going back 5 years and how they compare to a benchmark scenario of buying at index every day.
Well, I would encourage if there's an opportunity to bring a snapshot of a less number of years, it would still be valuable to see kind of what it's trending currently before even the end of the entire project.
Okay.
Yeah, because the hedging strategy was put in place in 2009, so it seems like going back 5 years might not be, you guys wouldn't have enough data for 5 years, would it?
They've populated it with 5 years so far in the draft model. So,
But the strategy for GWP only started when you made a proposal to hire RMI and all these hedging consultants. Wasn't that in 2009?
Let me think. RMI has, ACES. TEA's been on board for over 3 years now. I don't know the exact dates, but the traders have been active since 1998. So it's focusing on the value of the group and what they've added. And
so they may not have been on board, but they have been active.
Right, they were still trading. And
so again, I encourage us if we can speed up kind of some sort of presentation coming to the commission, even if it means looking at less number of years. I still think it would be valuable without waiting for the entire end of the project, at least to see some trending.
Okay. I'll see what I can do.
And then we can have a more comprehensive report once the project's done.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to move us on to 5C, update water rate design.
President Armenian, members of the Commission, Mike Bell. Just a brief update on what has transpired with regard to the water rate restructuring. As you're aware, the Council had moved forward with the option of the 2%, 4%, 5% annual rate increases along with the restructuring, and that was what was noticed in the Prop 218 notice. Since then, there have been 3 public meetings held, January 12th, 18th, and 19th. There were approximately 53 participants in the total of the 3 meetings. There were also 3 special community meetings that were conducted, one at the Moose Lodge, one with the Kiwanis Club, and another with the Adams Hill Homeowners Association. As a result of the Prop 218 process, there were a few protests that were received, but they amounted to less than 0.2% of the property owners, so very few number of protests. The City Council hearing on the rate restructuring was scheduled for January 31st, but was postponed from the 31st to March 20th. The reason for that postponement was a few of the members in the business community expressed concerns and reservations about the fire line charges. The fire line charges, where I think businesses were concerned, were those that have significant fire service requirements, in other words, large meters, but as a course of their business do not consume a lot of water. And the reason for that is, as you may recall, the restructuring of the water rates increased the fixed meter charges and decreased the commodity charges. Therefore, those customers that have a large fire line but little commercial use of water have some significant impacts in their bills. And so as a result of some of those discussions, it was determined that it would be best for the staff to take another look at that situation, evaluate it, see if there isn't a means of addressing that concern while at the same time having as minimal an impact on the overall revenues to the water utility as possible. So that process has just started in the last few days. I would anticipate that it will probably take a couple of weeks to run through those numbers and look at the options and alternatives. The other thing that I think, insofar as lessons learned are concerned, the staff spent a good deal of time with public outreach in the residential and the multifamily communities, but probably we could have done a better job in the business and commercial community. So between now and March 20th, that provides us with an opportunity to do more outreach in that environment. So what we do plan on doing is using our key accounts reps with business customers to make sure that we understand their concerns entirely, and to the extent possible we can address them, as well as work with the Chamber of Commerce with regard to this issue. So that's essentially the plan. The schedule would be to have the public hearing and council meeting on March the 20th. The council meeting on March 27th then would become the meeting where ultimate action on the rates would take place. And the effective date for the rate change then would become no earlier than April 27th, 30 days from adoption of the ordinance. So that's where we are presently. That's what the schedule looks like. I would anticipate that we would have another update at your next meeting, which I believe is March the 5th. So we should have some additional information and be able to share the status again at that point. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? I have a question. Commissioner Duckworth?
Thank you. These business interests that came forward, is there a place that I can go to get a better understanding of their concerns? Was this aired at City Council so I can just watch the audio, the video, or are these private staff conversations with business?
These, Peter, unless you're aware otherwise, my understanding is that these were meetings that were held with certain businesses, with staff in the utility and with the city manager. There haven't been any public meetings where that issue's been addressed yet.
So what do I do as a commissioner to understand their views? I mean, I know you're going to update us about your response to their views next month, but we had so many meetings here where people could have come forward, and all of our proceedings are on television, and we had the joint study session with council. So
well, I think
private conversations between staff and a handful of business owners, I'd like to hear what their concerns are too.
I think that is a good point. There were, and the meetings were noticed, and obviously all these changes were there in the notices. I would suggest that as a commissioner, and obviously with the connections that you have in the community, it would be helpful to perhaps explore those avenues, and it would be helpful for staff if you have any individual feedback from your connections in the community in that regard also. Otherwise, the meeting on the 20th will provide the next public opportunity for discussion and such on the subject.
Commissioner Yao?
I'm just curious about what the concerns were for the business customers. I mean, how much of a rate impact would it be? Would they still be saving money? Because we spend a lot of time analyzing the residential customers, and we ultimately conclude that the Tier 1 rate people will actually save money. Would this be the case for business customers, and how much of a rate impact would that be?
Well, again, depending upon their usage, the impact of the actual meter charge in some cases went up by $100, $200, $300 a month, which obviously over a 12-month period is a substantial amount. Now, if you consume a lot of water, then it was very similar to what we saw in the residential area, that with the commodity portion, the overall increase was low. But there are certain, and I would classify the businesses as commercial high-rise, where again you may be lifting water for fire protection purposes to a high elevation, which requires a sizable line into the facility, yet the building occupants themselves may not use much water. The other customer group that I'm aware of that's expressed concerns have been auto dealerships. And as you might imagine, a facility that is that large, again, has quite substantial fire suppression needs, but may not be consuming a lot of water on a monthly basis. So I don't know if there were other groups besides those two, Peter, that those were the two main groups.
But what were they paying before they're going to pay this extra $200 per month? Were they paying? Because I want to get some relative numbers. Right.
Well, that's what we're working on right now, and looking at, so that we can see if there isn't a solution to the problem. So, like I said, this all just came up last week, and so we were researching that very fact now and going back through different customer accounts and billings and such. One thing I might point out is we had that discussion on the residential side, and there was a lot of concern in the community about the fact that anecdotally, I use a fair amount of water, this is going to have a big impact on. And one of the things that we did that actually worked well in that public meeting process was a rate calculator. And so we were able to actually meet with concerned citizens and water users and say, okay, what size meter do you have? How much water do you use? And in most cases, the increases were a lot smaller than what people were afraid of. And that may be, to some extent, the case here. We just haven't had enough time to go through those individual accounts. But definitely, focus will be on those particular customers.
Okay. Commissioner Chan?
A couple of questions. So does it look like that we may come up with a separate rate for businesses?
I wouldn't go that far right now. I think we really need to assess exactly how many customers might this affect, and hopefully if it's a small number, the solution may not be something that's very difficult. If it's a big number, require a substantial change, obviously that creates problems because we've gone through the 218 notice, we've gone through a pretty elaborate procedure. Make an overhaul of substantial magnitude would be difficult. So I'm hopeful that the group that we're looking at here is a small representation of the total, which may give us the ability to make some adjustments within the 218 process.
Right. The number may be small, but then the amount of revenue may be high, though, because these are our biggest customers, right? Not really, because they don't consume a lot. Oh,
so
okay. I
it's
see. The lower consumption.
Percentage-wise,
Okay.
if it's on their bill, it's a sizable increase, but in the overall scheme of the revenue to the utility, it may not have that big an impact.
And the 2245 that went in and had preliminary approval, will that be changed?
No,
Okay.
no, that's still the plan.
So you're going to do just minor tweaking?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
We'll have these, again, I would think by the March 5th meeting, we'll probably have a good idea of that. But like I say, I'm cautiously optimistic that the number of customers we're talking about here and the revenues will be manageable enough for us to work a solution.
Thanks.
I wanted to make a comment. I'm a little bit troubled, to be honest with you. I'm completely supportive of the business community. I'm a little bit troubled by the fact that a couple of businesses raised their voices very late in the process, and then all of a sudden we are delaying the entire revenue that we might be getting with the rate increase to support the capital infrastructure, but yet we don't afford the same respect to homeowners who might be complaining, of which we do have some as part of the process. We don't seem to be delaying anything for them. So I want to be very cautious here that we don't create any sort of carve-outs just because a couple of businesses happen to have a little bit of a pull in the community. So I am going to withhold my judgment, obviously, personally, until we hear a full report and assessment by you. But there was a full process that we went through. They had opportunities to come before the commission. You know, these businesses, it's not like they're professionally staffed compared to the residents who have to, figure these things out. So I'm hoping we're not reacting to just some smaller interests who have put in calls to, officials and try and rattle the cages a little bit. So if we do anything, we need to make sure that it's fair. That's the most important principle. It's fair not only to the business customers, but it's fair to the residential customers so that everyone's paying their fair share. So I look forward to your report.
A point well taken, and we'll certainly keep that in mind as we move forward.
Following up on that, and I agree with everything that the President said, I just checked and there weren't any speaker cards for today. So did staff, in meeting with these business members, business community owners, suggest that they bring their comments forward today? Wouldn't that have been give us a shorter timeline than having to wait till our next commission meeting to hear about their concerns? I mean, what's done is done, and I look forward to hearing what you can work out and small tweaks. I'm all for small tweaks and moving forward, but this isn't actually, it's not correct that the only people to speak up about the perspective of business owners was just last week, because at the joint study session, I'm going by memory, but I thought that Councilmember Quintero and I think I recall the mayor, and I think I recall myself, I could be remembering incorrectly, but I think there were a couple of questions and comments for staff and a very long night's meeting concerning the different treatment of business rates, et cetera. I mean, this was not a topic completely ignored in the analysis of staff and multiple meetings. So I guess I think that rate making should be done in public. Rate making is a public function. Rate setting, rate increases should be publicly debated, and the place to come forward and offer your suggestions for changes in the rate structure should be, those suggestions should be brought forward at regularly scheduled commission meetings and or at city council meetings. And I'm not comfortable with a few private owners meeting privately off the record with staff, nor do I think it's really our function to go out and look for business owners. When you say, do any of us know them, I think there's an appearance of lack of transparency. I understand your comment that part of our function is to keep our ear to the ground and talk with people in the community, and I think we all do that. But I would hate for anybody watching our proceedings today to think that the commissioners would be going out and about and trying to hear from people who should have come forward during the public opportunity to speak. So I'm a little uncomfortable with the kind of that behind the scenes, we're going to work it all out. So hopefully when you do come forward next month, it will be with a proper respect for the importance of public, transparent proceedings.
Let me make a couple of comments in that regard. Number one, anything that evolves out of this process will definitely be public process, public discussion, full disclosure. Anybody that wants to weigh in will be able to do that. We have to under the public process. And I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression in terms of any kind of dealings or such that are going on behind closed doors. At this point, what we're really trying to do is understand the issue, understand the extent of the problem, if there is one. As I said earlier, the rates are noticed, the Prop 218 process is passed, that's all been very public, and that isn't changed or undone very easily, if at all. So at this point, I think I would represent this more as we held all the meetings with the residential groups. Yes, there was an opportunity for business to come out, but we didn't actively solicit them as we did the residential group. And in retrospect, I think that was a mistake on our part. We probably should have worked through our key accounts reps and talked more within the business community. And I can assure you, when we address electric rates in the future, that'll be something that we do. So, I mean, I would apologize to the commission and to the council for perhaps not working that side of this as well as we could have. And I would make the commitment to the commission that this process going forward will be very public and transparent, and there will be ample opportunity for any interested party to express their concerns or issues with regard to where this is headed.
Well, if there's, I wanted to close perhaps by saying that if there are business parties, members of the business community in Glendale who feel that their voice has not been heard, our chamber and our commission meetings are certainly open to the business community to come and reflect their views, and we're always glad to hear the views of all stakeholders, including the business community. Again, I wanted to kind of emphasize the optics of it right now is that a couple of people with pull made a couple phone calls, and next thing you know, we're 3 months behind schedule on the water rate design. So, I appreciate that we'll get a full disclosure and vetting within the commission meeting, as well as I'm sure at the upcoming city council session, but I think that this is something where the business community needs to act as a stakeholder in the community as well and participate in these sort of processes, as opposed to throwing a wrench into the process, in the late in the game.
Well, all the commissioners also have city email addresses, and that's on the website, and that's there for a reason, so that people can, not have to take time from their day to come here in person, but we're easy to reach, and staff knows how to find us too. So if there are business people watching, we would have been happy to see you today, or there's still time. You can email us.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to Agenda 5D, response to windstorm.
Blake?
Good evening. Ramona Bueg, Assistant General Manager, Electric. I'm going to revisit the windstorm response that we had arising from the November 30th to December 3rd windstorm problem. I believe you've seen the majority of the pictures and some of the statistics I'm going to show you here, but I added some clarification just to show that in that windstorm we had a majority of the area affected, both north-south Glendale, were affected by the outage or outages that we experienced. And some statistics that you may have not seen before. We had, when we say outages, we had 38 feeders that were affected by the outage, affecting a total of over 30,000 customers for the period of 3 days. And at one time, we have about 10,000 customers all out at one time while we're recovering some feeders. Some customers are still out. That's the highest number that we tracked. And depending on the number of customers and total minutes they're out, equating that to one of our indices, the total customer outage hours, it's about 109 or almost 110,000 hours. As a result, The outage duration is ranging from 4 minutes. That's the shortest outage that we have for a feeder. The longest being about 65 hours, but that's not for an entire feeder. That's for a section that affected about 30 customers, where we had a span of wire that's down. And let me explain why that is this area in particularly would have taken about 5 crews for us to make the repairs, and that would have taken them away from making the repairs that we need to restore some other people. And it's a decision that was consciously made, is do we pull resources to put 30 people back into service, or continue recovering and having an impact on a higher number of people. So those that we can do with 1 or 2 crews, we continue to repair, and we postpone the hardest area. And this is the area where the access to the poles were just difficult, and again, it would require at least 5 crews to finish the repairs. So that was a conscious decision that we made. So there were a total of 10 poles that we had to replace, a number of cross arms, 22, and only 4 transformers actually fell down and needed to be replaced. We replaced a total of just under 1 mile of wires during this outage. These are all overhead wires that we had to replace. And mind you, when we say wires replaced, when wires come, or a tree comes down on a span of wire, we just don't have to replace, or we needed to replace the damage. It's a domino effect. It's not just that span. We may have to go back a few hundred or 1,000 feet either direction. Not working. This is not because of power problems. This is a PowerPoint problem. Okay. So in terms of the actual duration, in terms of indices for those 4-day period, the indices that we tracked to compare performance, the KD is about 173 minutes. That tracks that if you're a customer affected, the average for the total number of customers affected based on those outage hours is 173 minutes. Factoring everyone that we have, all the total number of customers, that's 77 minutes. And interruption frequency index is about 0.45, or basically about half of our customers were affected by this event. We had, I mean, you've seen these numbers before, but this is the total hours that we spent on both straight time and overtime. We called everybody that we could to help us out. This is what helped us do the recovery a lot quicker than the other neighbors that we had. And we actually had help from an outside contractor who sent us 5 crews right away. And Burbank Water and Power, our neighbor, was kind enough to send us 3 crews. And what we did with the strategy is we had the outside contractor deal with the most difficult that required more equipment. And then Burbank Water and Power, they were dealing with what we call the secondary services, while our crews are focusing on the majority of the recovery. And this is something that we try to stick to, although a majority of our employees, staff, would rather continue to work until all the lights come back on. In terms of the safety, we wanted to keep them working safe, so we wouldn't let them work more than 18-hour shifts without a minimum of 6-hour rest. Okay. So total cost to date, it's actually over $500,000 from all the labor, materials, equipment, and we have not factored in the lost revenues from the power outage, but so far that's the damage that we have estimated for this.
Does that include the overtime?
That includes everything, yes. And that also includes overtime that we pay for the contractor as well as Burbank Water and Power. Oops. So just some more pictures just to emphasize the damage that this windstorm had done. This is a broken pole. It's broken right at the top, and you see the wires being dragged down. That's a whole power pole that was covered by a tree with a transformer. And there's a pole with a transformer on the ground. And that's another transformer on the ground. And then broken arms. You see a lot of this throughout the area. And the question is whether or not the integrity of these poles and the cross arms were were compromised by any of the installations that we made. All these poles and all the cross arms are designed to withstand close to 100 miles per hour. So although the report showed that the wind speed exceeded 90 miles an hour, we don't know exactly how high that went. But these damages were caused by, wind speeds of, I would guess, greater than 100 miles per hour. And we also had secondary services, and these are the ones that may have taken longer, is what we call the one-off outages. We try to not to delay them, but those were addressed a little later on in our outage recovery. At least, again, the process was we tried to do recovery that would impact the most customers, and we tried to narrow that down to the single outages. So that on some of these outages, by the way, some of the delays, we can't just put them back, like in this example, until they go through, in this case, they would need an electrician, because this is beyond our scope of work, beyond our jurisdiction. So we had to advise them to get an electrician. And the way we help them is we help them through an expedited permitting process with our building folks, building and safety. And others, we've had foreign objects. You probably didn't see this in the last picture, or the last report, but we've had loose objects coming from private properties. This happens to be a canopy that is being used as a temporary garage to cover a car. During the windstorm, it flew right into the lines, and it's one of the causes of the outages. So what we're asking our residents or our customers, if they do have this kind of installation in their homes, they need to make sure that it's secured, because we get visited by the Santa Ana winds very frequently. It needs to be secured and tied down. That was blown into the primary wires and caused basically a major outage. So there was also a question, and if one of our neighboring private utility, who shall not be named, was a question about the integrity of the pole, the design, whether or not they're overloading it, or is it the age a factor? If you look at this graph, and if you have seen our 5-year capital improvement plans, we report this on a regular basis where we are with our pole replacement inspection. What I want to point out is we have a lot of poles that are very old. Believe it or not, these poles get inspected regularly, and the believe it or not part is these poles are very, structurally, they're very sound. We don't have any problems with them. Okay, not because they're old means they're bad. Okay, and one of the requirements that we have when we have attachers to the pole, in terms of the integrity, before they attach to a pole, we require them to perform basically a calculation on the pole loading, whether or not we need to replace or support the pole before we allow them to attach. So we're pretty confident that's not an issue here.
Can you explain something on that, just to make sure I'm reading that bar chart correctly? So if we look at the highest bar, which says 626 poles,
right,
and it's on, I think, approximately like 65, 66 years.
That is correct.
Is that how old? So 626 of our poles are about 65 years old?
And that's correct. I think in those days, that's when the poles are more solid. Now we're looking for what we call more inexpensive poles that we put a lot more chemicals to treat. And these are, I think, the more solid poles in the days, back in the days. So, and what I want to emphasize here is that there are two programs that we think are very helpful that help us minimize the damage from the windstorm. We do have a pole maintenance program. Our inspection, we spend about $650,000 a year, and of that, we end up replacing an average 10 per year. And we spend about $1 million just on our pole replacement program. And tree trimming. Although some of the damages from the tree from the storm were due to the trees hitting the power lines, it's not because of tree trimming. These are poles. The requirement that we have for trimming is we have to maintain a minimum separation. So if the growth is beyond the height of the wires, we can't control the way they fall. That doesn't mean that we're in violation, but it just means that it happened. Sure.
Quick question, if I may, about this. this means this says we spend $650K per year in inspection,
Correct.
and we only guess replace about 10 a year or so,
Correct.
which costs about $400K.
Correct.
Okay. Sounds a lot to me, but again, I don't understand maybe the dynamics of this.
Right.
Maybe not right now, but maybe at a future time you guys can go into that figure. Those, I don't know, it looks...
Yeah, just an overview. When we replace a pole, one of the things we do is we
Sure.
try not to kill the power. We try to do it live, so we secure them, we insulate them, and then we try to do the work without interrupting power if we don't have to.
I'm sure it's not very simple, but...
Yeah, I will provide you more information.
Can I ask you a quick question? When you said the rule focuses on the separation from the pole and the tree so that you can't do anything about the fact that the tree has grown up above the pole, is that an in-house rule or is that a statewide rule? Or?
That's a General Order 95 rule by the CPUC, the safety rule that we abide by.
Okay, so can there be, could there be rulemaking done that would have, that could have helped us? Is there room for a rule that addresses height?
Well, we end up with a canopy. The challenge when we get into these tall trees, as we compare there to the lines, is we'll end up with giant bonsai trees, and they're not going to look pretty. So we have to balance that with what we do. And if you can imagine the tall sycamore or fir trees and just chopping them off below the power lines, I don't think they'll look pretty. So that's a challenge.
So there's no rule in place, though, that addresses the tipping point between danger and aesthetics. There's no rule about that helps us take or trim down a tree that's dangerously above a pole.
As long as we maintain the separation for safety, so that so they don't sway during the wind, but we don't prevent them from falling. So, in conclusion, could we have avoided the outages? The answer is no. Majority of the outages is caused by downed trees, and that resulted in broken poles, broken cross arms, wires down. And we were, I think, very effective in our recovery because we were able to activate our staff very early on. They responded. We have a lot of good people that wants to help, want to keep the lights on. Our neighbors stepping up to help us out, the city of Burbank, and as well as a contractor willing to send. And in this case, we had Henkels and McCoy work in our system before. So as soon as this happened, when we contacted them, they sent us people that have already worked in our system, so they're familiar. We didn't have to do too long of an orientation. They just went and did the work. So the tree trimming, we believe, has paid off. I think the damages would have been, or the outages would have been a lot more if we were not doing an active tree trimming program. The reconstruction from 4 kV to 12 kV, increasing that separation between the wires, we think helped very, very well. And one of the things we need to really improve on is when the customers call, they wanted more details, and we needed to provide them better information. We're working on a tool to do that. And that's really what frustrated our customers is when we say, we'll probably get there in 2 hours. That's not good enough. They wanted solid information. Do I need to stay in a hotel? Do I need to wait? So we're working on a system to make that better. But one of the things I'm really proud of is we do have a very dedicated staff. They were willing, they were able, and they were here as soon as they heard that we had problems. They all came in. And then one of the things that continue helping us, we would continue looking at this in spite of the budget. And this is what I want to correct. Yeah, the budget has affected some of our programs. Does that mean that we stop? The answer is no. What we're now looking at is where can we make the biggest impact in our system when we continue to implement a less aggressive program. And this is what this is about. Okay? So lessons learned, we have done an after-storm assessment. We're reviewing how better we can staff rather than waiting for a phone call for them. As soon as we're aware there's a situation coming, which we did 2 weeks ago. We had another Santa Ana wind that was predicted. We had staff ready to go for the weekend, but fortunately or unfortunately, there was no event. But we had staff ready to go. We need to get the other staff involved, office and phone support. This is to provide more information. We were slow in activating phone support. We still relied on outside services. It wasn't until the second day that we started bringing people in so they can deal with them on a more personal basis. And we need to have other support like warehouse and fleet during off hours available so that when we run out of stock, we're not scrambling. They can concentrate on fixing the work and have the other folks worry about our supply. We didn't get the risk management staff involved early on to help us with risk assessment. What I mean by that is as a result of this, we're getting a lot of claims from folks that had damages. So if we had risk management involved, we would have probably had a better approach in trying to assess what to anticipate. So we're working on that. Again, tracking tools. We're developing better tracking tools to make sure that everyone that is responding has the same information. We found that we had very duplicative information because sometimes we had the same customer that would call 10, 12 times, and we recorded 10, 12 times, not realizing we've already addressed the problem. And it's a continuous improvement process. We will continue to improve. We'll get better. We can always do better. So with that,
A couple quick questions. In terms of your inventory for spare parts, spare poles, how do you feel you fared on that in terms of having adequate replacement inventory?
we did. In some cases, we're criticized for having too much inventory, but in this case, it paid off. We did run out of some nuts and bolts for the secondary services, which we're not used to dealing with. And this is, again, where mutual aid was very helpful. Burbank also provided us with the materials that we needed, so we didn't have to scrounge around.
My second question, both to you and Mr. Lenz, how is this feeding into, or is it feeding into a fresh assessment of the emergency preparedness plans? If we, as Congressman Schiff has said, looking at this as a drill on emergency preparedness for something that might be much more larger in magnitude, are we doing a fresh assessment to see what we've learned from this to improve that?
The answer is yes. One of the things that came out of this is we do have a citywide emergency plan, and one of the subset of that is dealing with disasters. I've recently updated that, and so that we'll be addressing all the shortcomings that we identified during this windstorm. And that doesn't address not only windstorm, but it also would address earthquake, which is the one that we've always planned for. So, and if you recall, last year we had another windstorm about the same time. So we have enough years to kind of predict that about the same time every year we probably should be looking at anticipating a similar problem.
I think it would be worthwhile at some point to, I know we talked about it, but if in terms of the things that you've improved or changed as a result of this, to maybe have a short discussion about that, because part of the responsibility is obviously on the utility to try and restore power, but part of the responsibility on this sort of emergency preparedness is also on the individual to have appropriate preparations to be able to last through something that's much more significant in nature. So I think it'd be a good refresher and reminder for the public to both see what we're doing on the organizational side as well as what they could be doing to make sure they're prepared on their side.
Absolutely. The other thing that came out of this is the mutual aid. Is we're trying to extend that so it wouldn't require a person in my position or the general manager to call our counterparts. Our field people actually have come up with this suggestion because I don't know if you realize this, once we got done with our emergency, we sent our staff to help out Pasadena to help with their recovery. And as a result of that, the field crews started talking about, hey, why do we have to have our bosses tell us to come out? So what we've asked them to do is get together, come up with a plan, that trigger point, so that it doesn't require for a high-level manager to get involved. So the three cities, Burbank, Pasadena, and Glendale, are working on a common plan to make that to happen a lot quicker.
Great. Commissioner Jamian? Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I do have a question. First of all, congratulations on doing the great work, and it's good to see that there are lessons learned and what are we currently looking at to make sure that we're prepared next time. I know that we have a overhead to underground conversion program, and I understand, I'd imagine with our budget cut and all, it's probably deferred and it's probably not going as fast as it should be. With this latest windstorm, my question is, were there areas where you could tell or have been identified where if the circuit had been grounded, then the damage would not be as great?
No, absolutely. Unfortunately, we do not have an active overhead underground conversion in the city. We tried that to create, or we proposed doing an underground district a little at a time, but the cost is prohibitive that we weren't able to sustain that.
Given the amount of damage that we had with the latest windstorm, does it make sense to relook at that and see if there are certain areas that make sense to go underground?
The answer is yes. But we have not gone in that far.
Okay.
But there's a certain area that we would love to, but there's also a lot of restriction on the streets, competing with the other utilities that we found in certain areas.
Okay.
I can name you some areas where we can't. Undergrounding is simply impossible.
Right. Yeah, those you can't. But I'm suggesting wherever we can, and where it would be relatively easy for us to do so, and also avoid the huge amount of damage. I recommend that be looked at.
We'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
I can imagine, because it costs $40,000 to replace one pole, how much that would cost if you were to go underground.
Well, that's an average.
Right. Quick question. You expressed that I think the cost would be right about $500K or greater. Do we have insurance for that, or as the city, or do we get some of that back?
It's below our threshold, I believe. I did check with our risk manager on that. I think we have to get over $250,000 to collect from insurance. And what we were trying to do, the three cities are still trying to do, is we're trying to still have the state recognize this as an emergency. We haven't given up on that. If they do, then there's a way to recover the cost from FEMA.
Okay. Did you say the threshold was 150?
250, I believe, because we're self-insured. 2.5 million. I apologize.
Okay.
I'm off by one decimal point.
I believe it's $2 million.
Or 2 million.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions? Okay, we do have a speaker, Mr. Milano.
Commission President Armenian, members of the Commission, my name is Herbert Molano. I'll try to bring this brief since I have to leave. The issue of bringing the overhead power lines and replacing power poles to be underground, I think it's a significant need for the city, not just for the safety in case of winds, not just because of the possibility of breakage during an earthquake, and the possibilities of losing, power and the dangers that those lines cause. But it's also a question of blight. During the past month, I have been looking towards purchasing some income property in South Glendale, and I took a note on Windsor. You should take a drive in Windsor between, let's say, Glendale Avenue towards Verdugo, and it really is an incredibly awful thing to see. I mean, if we're going to be a first-class city, we really got to get rid of this stuff. I mean, it looks awful. And if you look at some of the lines, power lines that go from the poles, they go across the street. And in some areas, I could take a picture of it, it's just crisscrossing back and forth. And I said, my God, I think that there have been other cities in Southern California, I've heard, that have taken a plan, long-range plan, 20, 30 years, to eventually move all the lines. But if it doesn't become part of your plan, it will never be funded, and we still continue to transfer about $20 million from the utility. And I think it is, if you look at the city's charter in depth, section 11, subsection 17, chapter 11, section 17, you will see that the interpretation that you will get as to the obligation that the Commission has towards guiding the City Council towards making the appropriate amount of money, making it relevant towards setting aside. It's very clear in the charter that the interpretation that the City Attorney gave you today is incorrect, and I suggest that you probably bring it up for careful discussion and deliberation, because the way I read it, it is within your prerogative to make that recommendation to the City Council, and they have to provide for a sufficient establishment to meet the normal depreciation needs of the city. And this has been left out for a long, long time, in addition to tremendous amounts of other infrastructure needs. So that's my recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on undergrounding, it's not a simple issue. It has a lot of environmental ramifications. It increases the difficulty in terms of maintenance of wires. And in a city as old as Glendale, you'd have to be prepared that GWP is going to come digging through your backyard to underground some, because many of these lines are going through the backyards of houses. So I think it's not a simple issue, but certainly an issue worthy of looking at in more detail.
I would add to that I think, as one of the commissioners expressed, it is probably a good thing to look at if in areas where the risk of these overground poles may be much higher than if than if they were underground. I think something in those areas alone should be looked at probably, or at least put into some sort of discussion.
Probably prioritize.
And my recommendation would be on, of course, distribution lines and not the secondary lines in the backyard of a home. And what I recommend, is in areas where it has been designated as high risk, those should be considered as with underground circuit. And everyone knows with an underground circuit, chance of a failure is much slimmer. Okay, and with the smart meters going in, detection would be much easier. And it's just a much more reliable system. That's why all utilities are heading toward that direction.
Just consider that if you want to agendize that for a future meeting. We can talk about it later.
That'd be fine, yeah.
Okay.
I'd imagine we'd be getting more updates on it later anyway.
Yeah, we certainly will. It's just one word of caution on underground. One of the issues with undergrounding with respect to reliability, when there is an outage, it's more permanent. And in terms of trying to do what we call being able to do temporary work, it's nearly impossible to do temporary work on a permanent. With overhead, we're able to do just to restore. The way we have been trying to improve our indices to keep the lights on is if we have a problem, on overhead, it's easy to isolate, and we can provide temporary power. In areas where it's undergrounded, very difficult to do that. So I just want to point that out. And there's in Florida where the undergrounding started back 30 years ago. They're finding out now that the cost of replacing their infrastructure on underground it's tremendous. That they're now looking at putting some of their systems above ground to help them with the cost. So it's something that we need to find a balance on.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's extremely expensive. It doesn't make sense everywhere. But if there have been areas where you were identified through this windstorm, that would make sense.
Oh, absolutely.
And we should consider that, yeah.
Okay.
I understand it's very expensive compared to overhead.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to Smart Grid Update, Agenda 5E.
Craig Keenan?
Mr. President, Commissioners, my name is Craig Keenan. I'm the Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator at GWP, and I'm here to cover just 3 short issues on the Smart Grid upgrade. You could go to the first slide. The first issue is the opt-out plan. We were originally scheduled to go to City Council on January 21st to present our plan, and it was to be based on what was PG&E's interim decision. Well, over the time, the PUC modified that decision, and then they came out with their final decision. I guess it is appealable, but it came out on the 1st. So we're going to reevaluate in light of what the commission order was. We're looking at probably, that says what's going on here? You're really messing me up. February 28th was when we were going to go back to City Council. There's an issue that's going to Council that night that's going to preclude us from being there. We're going to move it to the 6th, it looks like.
Yeah, Mr. President, members of the Commission, we're looking at the 6th tentatively, which will give us another opportunity to come back to you on this issue. The PUC decision was just issued last week.
February 1st.
And there is some, shall I say, surprise at the PUC's decision in the sense that they're allowing opt-outs to put analog meters back in. So staff still has to meet internally to look at the decision and the rationale behind the decision. We're not PUC jurisdictional, but we are looking to that decision for guidance, so it's going to take some time to work through that and really figure out what our recommendation is. At this time, after the decision, we don't have a clear recommendation. We're certainly not ready to say, yes, definitely, we're going to follow that to the T until we have a chance to dissect the rationale behind why they went to analog.
Excuse me, I thought this went to council on the 30th. Didn't we get that notification from you?
No, that was continued as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
That was continued as well.
Oh, okay.
It was a last-minute continuation.
Last-minute change.
So long story short, there's a lot of moving parts here. We're still trying to sort out what we think our recommendation is, but we're pretty certain we're going to have a chance to come back to you with that recommendation before we go to council, even if it's the day before we go to council. Because it looks like the earliest date is for council is the 6th, and we'd be able to come to you the day before.
Just to give you an update on how many we have 94 people on the electric meter opt-out list and 41 on the water, and there's an overlap. I can't say what the overlap is, but those customers do overlap. And the other...
do you know if they're low-income customers or just regular customers? Those 94?
We could find that out. I don't know off the top of my head.
Because the impact of the PUC decision could impact these customers because I guess there's a cost associated with switching to analog meters. So potentially these low-income customers might, if they are low-income customers, they might be willing to go with an advanced meter because the cost might be prohibitive for them. So if you can find that out, as part of your next report.
I'm sure that's one of the things we'll review when we're reviewing the CPUC decision. What I also wanted to point out is in the past few months we've had 33 people who had opted out opt back in. The numbers are getting smaller. The next thing I just wanted to give you an update on, we've been talking for some time about the in-home display pilot. We do have a small pilot underway. We have 10 displays out there.
Why do we only have 10? Haven't we been talking about this for months?
I'm getting to that.
Sorry.
I say that every Monday and every Tuesday.
That's because she chaired 4 meetings where we kept getting told 100 and 200 by February.
No, things were moving along really good, and then in December there was an issue with the MDM, and it had to do with processing of data. And our IT people have to put in a few more servers to be able to crunch the data to get it to SEVA into O-Power in order to get these things out to the information out to the public. That is supposed to be done on Thursday. And once that's complete, we can go right back out and start installing them, and about a month after that we can turn on O-Power, and so that's the one issue.
And Mr. President, members of the Commission, we know there's a lot of excitement around the device, and we would love to roll them out, but we want to make sure they work well before we roll them out. So that's why we're making sure that that's the case.
Sympathize. That's what
that was one thing I noticed earlier when I looked at the report. 10?
Yes. These things take time to roll out, and you make goals and stuff, and things happen.
And remember us, because some of us said that we'd be happy to be guinea pigs, and
we have you on the list.
Even if you have software glitches, we could tolerate them.
If we could put one in tomorrow, if you're not worried about a software glitch.
I'm not worried, but I think we will be better ambassadors to the community if we can say that we've been among the people who are doing this beta test. I think a few of us offered some months ago. I have a high tolerance for some glitches, but I think people do ask me about it when I'm out and about.
I get a phone call tomorrow.
Yeah, please bring it on.
So we are concerned. We're moving ahead with this, and it is going to happen. The other thing I just wanted to bring you up to date on the budget and the expenses. This is a combined chart, but it's really small too, isn't it? Back when we started this project, we were talking about a combined electric and water project of around $71 million. To date, combined, we've spent, well, this is through November, $56.2 million. About 17.9 of that is water, and the other 38.2 or 3 is electric. If you look at how much money we received from the DOE, the net to us is about 39.6 once you take in the amount of money we received from the DOE. We're projecting to be below that original $71 million mark in June 2013, and it's looking around $69 million combined. And the net cost to us after all the grants, includes the CEC grant, would be about $48.1 million. Hopefully next time we'll be able to give you an update on the opt-out, and and you'll have a display. We'll make sure.
Just a quick comment. This is a hardware-software issue, so I would urge you guys to continue as you're doing. Test very, very small numbers before expanding.
Exactly.
It will cost much more if you scale out too fast. I mean, this is, yeah.
I mean, we don't mind if you know our situation, and your commissioners or your employees, and you know what we're testing this. Then we'll be happy to make it guinea pigs and have you participate. When we get out in the larger public, it needs to work.
Right.
Yeah. We definitely will be more forgiving.
Well, that's maybe he doesn't trust that. That's the problem. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, next we have oral communications. We had one card, Mr. Herbert Milano, but I don't see that he's here, so we will move on. Old business. Is there any update on the iPads? George?
I believe the iPads are on hold for the moment, though we are in the process of acquiring them.
Okay, new business agenda forecast. Start with new business, if there's anything.
I think we talked about a number of items for new business. First one was if we wanted to agendize recommendation to include public speaking comments in the minutes. You guys want to, if anybody wants to make a recommendation or when to talk about that. One of the
Are you expressing an opinion?
I think we should at least agendize that since we discussed it.
Is there a second to discuss that?
I would prefer to table that unseconded motion until I thought we were going to hear back from city attorney on what the history of the policy was and city council's position on it and how it had changed. So I would have seconded it, but I'd like to learn more.
Well, we should, yeah.
So
Well, we could agendize it, and then if we have a second, and then
Okay.
The city attorney could present her findings, and then we can continue discussing it. That way it'll be on the agenda.
Okay.
And again, we can, I recorded a lot of things, so we're obviously going to have more things to potentially agendize.
I just
Then we can
think
fit into
that's-
one meeting. So,
I think that is so small, such relatively low priority that I don't want it to bog down meetings where we may be dealing with the business community next month and...
Nobody's coming.
so I'll second it with the understanding that we'll prioritize in terms of which meeting we might.
Nothing urgent, just something we discussed.
And for purposes of my clarification, would this be then a report regarding the information on my findings, or do you want to potentially take action on it and revise the procedure? We could have one meeting where I tell you what I found, and then you could have a second meeting where you talk about if you want to change it or not. That prolongs the discussion somewhat, but it's up to you.
That sounds good to me. Then we can gather our thoughts.
I think just the report would suffice for now.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we do have a seconded agenda item just on the report of what the past practice, history of the past practice has been. Okay, then sorry, you want to go on with your list? All right. I had the issue of the safety report, a little bit deeper dive on kind of what some of the safety issues are and what's being done to address those. So I would propose that if there's a second.
I'll second that.
Again, let's go through the list and then we can prioritize in terms of what meetings these might be needed for. I had also discussed about the community outreach plan at some point, having that presented to us. There's a second to that.
I'll second.
Commissioner Yao, you had suggested something about commissioners taking responsibility for a deeper dive on certain parts of the strategic plan. Did you want to make any sort of agenda?
Not necessarily. No, not necessarily, because I thought that if we want to minimize time for the next quarterly update, that we can just take on our own on some of these items and then report back quickly to the full commission, but rather than have staff answering each question, and then we can fine-tune what's more relevant rather than just anticipating all the reds or critical to talk about.
Okay, if we don't discuss it formally with a formal decision, then it'll be based on individual commissioner initiative to take that on an individual.
Well, Mr. President, members of the Commission, I thought I understood that we were going to come back next time with an additional highlight of the red items that included an explanation of why they were behind and what our best estimate of was when we would catch up, if ever, on some of those.
Why don't we start? Let's start with that. Let's get that, and then we can please remember it, make a note of it yourself, and then you can bring it up.
Yeah, if it's necessary next time, if it's not fully acceptable for the full commission.
Okay. And then we discussed about some sort of earlier report on hedging versus spot market buying, some of the early analysis of the trending. You'd said 6 months for the full assessment, right? For the full model.
Yeah, it's all one model. I can talk to staff and see if it helps to do less data, but it's still one model that they're trying to. I'm not sure if it's going to make a difference if it's 2 years worth or 5 years worth. They're still trying to perfect the model.
Okay.
I'll see what I can do. We are producing just last month at council's request a monthly trading activity report, and we can forward that to you folks as well. It has a chart that shows revenue for the last 5 years, a comparison. It has a section on trading and hedging activity by numbers of trades and by volume. And that's a pretty good, it's a one-page snapshot that I think would be helpful.
All right, so I'm willing to...
But it doesn't tell us how well the model is doing, because that's the purpose of the model, is to indicate where we are and how much we're making compared to just buying it on the open market or without having the model.
No, that's the goal of the trading metrics work, and that's not done yet. So no, the one-page report that we are currently producing does not show what the trading metrics will show. It shows information on revenue for the last 5 years and number of trades for on a month-to-month comparison, the current month versus that same month last year, and a month-to-month comparison of volume for the current month versus the same month the prior year. That's what that report shows. It does not show or compare our performance to other utilities surrounding us.
I don't mind seeing that report if it's easily forwarded to us, and then we can take a look, but I would be more interested in the other stuff.
So let's start with, I'm going to suggest let's start with just making that part of the next report. What you just said is available now. And then at the next meeting, if we want to, after we look at that, we can decide whether or not we want to agendize a more deeper dive. Are you okay with that?
Unless you want to put it on for a future agenda, whenever 3-6 months from now.
Do you think it'll be ready in 6 months, the full model?
My best estimate's 3 to 6 months. I'll bring it as soon as it's done. We'll come to you with a full report on what the model shows and the metrics for the 5 years of data they analyzed.
At least so that we don't lose track of it. Let me suggest that in 6 months we would actually add it to that agenda item.
Okay.
And then if there's a second, and then we can adjust it based on where you think you are with.
And if I can bring it sooner, I certainly will.
And that would include the backcast, right?
Yes, that'll have a 5-year backcast.
So
Thanks.
the proposal is an agenda item 6 months from now on the full model on hedging versus spot market buying. Do I have a second on that?
I'll second.
And then we had opt-out. We discussed that the management would have a full assessment of where you want to go with opt-out.
We intend to come back to the next meeting with some information for you on our recommendation on opt-out.
Okay. So do we need to make a motion on that, or are they're going to do that themselves?
No, not unless there's some objection from this commission.
Well, how about some requests for that report, whether if you can clearly show what the PUC is allowing versus what your recommendation, if it deviates much from the PUC, and if we can also make some additional input before then. Can we even suggest certain aspects of the opt-out before your report, for your consideration?
Well, you can schedule a special meeting if you'd like to consider it sooner.
Because this is one day before it's going to be presented to City Council, so they would have less than 24 hours.
But can't we just forward suggestions?
But then it
by
wouldn't
email?
necessarily be for us to make a recommendation as a motion to the City Council whether to adopt a certain aspect of the opt-out process or not. Because it's more for information rather than for us to make the recommendation to the City Council. Then.
Can I ask?
We can certainly take your, even if it happens on the 6th, which schedules are difficult, and I know that the council has requested that we bring in 2 specific experts on RF to be at that meeting, and we don't know if they can make it yet. So, but even assuming that it was on the 6th, we can certainly take a recommendation from this commission the day before to council on the next day. In the form of a motion with a recommendation for how you think it should be dealt with. I mean, we can amend those things on the fly, and if we all agree that there's a better path than what we've already submitted to council, we'll go in the next day and say we had a thorough discussion with the commission, and our recommendations changed or not depending on that discussion.
If I can ask a procedural question. If they shared, can GWP share the opt-out proposed program in advance of the meeting? It's like they do other documentation, and then can we individually reply back with input?
You can individually reply back. Okay, to answer your first question, yes, certainly. That can be shared with this full commission in advance, and you can all individually provide comments and input. There's a little bit of a danger of kind of a Brown Act situation, but, it wouldn't be a recommendation of the commission. It'd be you as individuals saying, I think you should look at doing this. If we got, for example, conflicting advice from different commissioners, it might be hard for us to discern how to deal with that.
So what I was going to suggest is if we provided that opportunity, it might give you a little bit of advance peek in advance of the actual commission meeting, what individual views might be, and then on the day of the commission meeting, you'll come a little bit better prepared to address some of those things that we can come to some sort of consensus.
Well, and maybe if a comprehensive report isn't completed, we can still send you maybe an outline of the position once it's solidified, so that you can
Exactly.
give us some comments on that.
For feedback.
Just as long as we're sure that you're not talking to each other about it, it's just,
Yep.
Yeah. Send the information. We either will or won't comment
Okay.
in one individual to staff
Sure.
and save back and forth crosstalk for the meeting.
Okay, then the last item I had on the list that I took a note of was undergrounding on distribution lines. Did you want to?
Yeah, Ramon indicated that when I asked him point blank if there were areas where he identified could have been better handled if it had been underground, he said yes. So yes, I would like him to come back and go over, like, he can spend time and look at it, either a month or two, it doesn't matter, and come back and let us know if there are indeed those areas that would make sense financially to do it. Only, if so, then that we would recommend it.
Is there a second on that agenda?
I'll second it.
Okay. So we have.
Do you think he needs 30 days or 60
Well,
days?
I guess I'm just wondering, we have this item on a deeper dive on safety issues, and things like clearance for tree trimming is related to the windstorm and the safety issues, and the undergrounding is related to I'm just wondering, I guess, if we can wrap it into the safety issues deeper dive. And I don't know when you were planning on having that, but to me, they kind of all fit together here. It's like, we have this event,
do, but,
there's
you know,
risk, how can we reduce that risk? One of the ways is undergrounding, what's the cost?
To me, though, the safety issue agenda item was specifically meant for the places where
Scorecard.
we've got a safety issue on the scorecard, which
Okay,
is human
okay.
performance. I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to
Okay.
dilute the focus on that.
Okay, I wasn't clear if it
With
was related to the
system- with
storm or
system
not. I
performance.
lost
That
track
was
of
not the
that.
storm.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I would prefer to get, it sounds like he's fairly knowledgeable and has a nationwide perspective to some extent. It sounds like he knows what he's talking about. I would prefer for him to come and tell us when he has found the time to do a really good quality job rather than us dictate we want it in a month or 2 months. I think given the fiscal impacts, we're talking about the possibility of adding it to a strategic plan in the future. I don't see why we would rush him and say 1 or 2 months. Let's have him come forward and tell management when he's, able, give us, let him know that we're very interested in this, and he should be thinking about putting together a report and put it on the agenda when he has done a competent.
Well, if I could suggest, since we do have a proposal in a second, I mean, by putting it on the forecast, at least we won't forget about it.
Exactly. I just
And
didn't.
We can always adjust the date
Right,
based
I
upon
agree.
when he's able to do it.
Yeah,
So
I was
that's-
only
I
talking
agree. I
about
would say-
1 or 2
yeah.
months where you'd hear a
I would
report.
suggest putting it out, like, say, 3 months or something, and
That's
give him
months or more.
give him a
Yeah,
chance
That's
to.
fine. Yeah.
So let's go through this list if we could, just so we can target
What is the last
actual
one?
dates.
Are you done? Are you?
Yeah, sorry, is that
Okay, the
more?
last one was the important one with the electric fund transfer. If we can provide some input to staff on the recommendation to City Council before it happens
Right.
every year, because I think as this body needs to have some input on that, whether that we propose it or okay with whatever funds can be transferred, at least we have a voice and maybe make a final motion to Council as a recommendation what the fund or amount should be.
I would second that.
And I'll talk to Glenn about the timing on that with respect to the budget, where it fits into the budget process. I don't know specifically where it fits in. I know that the ultimate budget's approved, June 30th, July 1, but I think most of it's done, a few months, so we're probably getting right to that point. So let me talk to Glenn and find out when we can work that in.
Any other, before we go into prioritizing these on specific dates, any other?
You were going to just put it on the forecast, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go through all of them now. We're going to decide where.
Oh, okay,
Decide where, yeah. But any other proposals before we do that process? Okay. So let's just go down the list in no particular order. Recording speaker comments. We did approve that, but we said it's not a high priority.
No priority. Oh,
Christine, when do you think you can?
I could have it by next month, but if I may suggest, you're going to have a fairly full agenda
Right.
next month, so perhaps in April, it looks like you've got a rather light agenda.
So April, let's say April for that. Okay, next one, electric fund transfer. I know that we need to time that with budgeting process, but given the dates you just gave, Mr. Lenz, would May be an appropriate month for that?
I'm thinking May might be too late. So
April?
Why don't we put on April for now? And like I said, I'll confirm with Glenn the timing of it.
But can we also have some kind of a process, informational, so that we can understand when the budget takes place and when do the funds recommendation takes place? Is it totally behind the scene before it gets to the city council for approval, or can there be a step where we can get put by input before the final budget is set?
Well, I'm trying to figure out when we typically bring the budget to you, to the extent that...
I mean, April sounds about right, and we can definitely include what the process is. And as I stated earlier, it's really a recommendation from the city manager, and that it's a finding by the city council that it's not appropriate to transfer. So we're kind of adding a step to the process, but it's not inappropriate given your role as a commission. So probably April, but we can take a look at that and maybe tentatively calendar.
Let's target April. That. Safety report,
The scorecard.
scorecard, analysis of the safety items.
Whenever the next scorecard is presented.
That's actually a good point. Do we want to do that in the context of the next quarterly report with the added...
Which is part of the May?
Red, right.
Okay, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Community outreach plan.
Ned's not here. I'll have to talk to him, but I'd give it at least a couple months.
So do you want to do that for April?
April.
April? Okay. Undergrounding, distribution lines.
Okay.
That's right. We said a few months on that, right? 3 months.
3 months.
May seems
Yeah.
very busy
May or
as well.
June?
So May.
May?
'Cause there may be some budget impacts.
Okay. So let's do, okay. Opt-out is going to be next month. And I guess that could also be part of the smart grid update.
Yes.
Okay. And then for hedging versus spot market buying, you're just going to provide the information
6 months.
of what you had, but we were going to put an approximate time when you think the whole model would be done.
Yeah, we're going to say put 6 months out. So what are we to? So August. Put July.
Let's put July.
Put July.
Okay.
And like I said, if it's done before then, I'll bring it in.
Okay, that's all I had. Did I miss anything? Okay. If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.